This is Xochitl Ashe. Welcome to the Pachamama School Podcast, where ancient earth wisdom meets the evolution happening right now. I am a fifth generation Quechua-Aymara medicine woman, and I've prepared an episode today that I know will give you exactly what you need, not just to survive, but to thrive during these incredible times of planetary transformation. If you're here, it's because your soul knows there's another way, a way that our ancestors have always known. And today, we are diving deep. Let's begin. Hey, just a little note. When we were recording these podcast episodes, we thought that the name of this podcast was going to be Future Proof Earth. But as we sat down with spirit, with the earth, and with some medicine, we realized the real name of this podcast is Pachamama School. So enjoy this podcast. Just wanted you to know that the podcast has a new name. Love you. Welcome to another episode of Future Proof Earth. I'm so happy. Today our guest is somebody that I just absolutely love, a beautiful friend of mine, and somebody that I can't wait to introduce you to. But if you've been with my work for the past 3 years, you know her because she's been part of our team, and she's up to so many incredible things. But she really is such a powerful breath teacher. So I want to introduce you to Brittany Lillegard.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. It really is such a treat and such an honor, Xochitl.
Well, Brittany is an international breath facilitator and founder of MoveBreath. She has a decade of training under renowned teachers such as Dr. Perry Nickelston, Wim Hof, and Dan Brule, alongside immersive study in India. Known for her approachable, playful, and trauma-informed teaching style, Brittany has shared her work at venues including the Esalen Institute, Sisters in Psychedelic Conference, LA Psychedelic Conference, and Unison Festival. Breathwork has been pivotal in her own healing from depression and anxiety, guiding her as both a compass and a source of inspiration. A modern nomad, Brittany travels North America in her truck, bringing accessible and transformative breathwork experiences to communities far and wide.
Ooh, that sounds.
Well, I am so happy to have you here. So I just want to give my own personal intro to Brittany. So Brittany I want to give Brittany a lot of love and appreciation because Brittany comes in and out as a consultant for us. But Brittany, for I think it was like about 2 years approximately, was our operations manager, and really, I have to say, helped me become more visible and put my work into a more accessible, orderly fashion. We were able to really create incredible curriculum together. And yeah, if you have Brittany on your team, you're all right. More than better. More than all right. So, Brittany has been a breathwork facilitator and teacher for a long time, even when she was working with us, and now has a facilitator training. And if you hear noise in the background, don't worry. It's just her adorable, wise,
Sorry about that.
loving dog named Polly, who I'm an auntie to. So she's allowed to be here on the podcast. And I wanted to bring Brittany on the podcast because actually Brittany was pivotal to us launching Sacred Psychedelics. And as the podcast has shifted and grown and now is Future Proof Earth, really the conversations that are really incredibly interesting to me are the conversations of like what are the things we need to do in order to thrive during these very quickly changing times on earth. And I believe that the way that Brittany teaches breath work, the way she holds these tools are so helpful to us being able to thrive at this time. So Brittany, how did you what's your journey with breath work? How did you come about to
Yeah.
that?
Thank you for the question. You could see Polly's little snout popping in every now and then. Um, my first foray into breath work was actually the result of me losing my breath, which is really interesting. So, I had been living in Chicago, a very urban lifestyle. And I really thought at the time in my mid 20s that I had life figured out. I had a career that I loved. I was a personal trainer. I thought I was the epitome of health. I worked out regularly. I ate well. Um, but I started having panic attacks. And for people who have never experienced a panic attack before, one of the primary symptoms that a lot of people experience is it feels like you can't breathe. And when it feels like you can't breathe, it literally, for a lot of people, can also feel like dying. And so, I had been working with the breath at that point in a purely functional manner, teaching people how to breathe better so that they could move better. But I had never considered the breath in a spiritual space. I'd never considered the emotional space of the breath before. And it really piqued my curiosity to want to learn more and more. But where my journey really, really, really starts was actually a teacher of mine, Dr. Perry Nickelston, who you mentioned at the start. And I was at a fitness conference with him a couple months into having these panic attacks. And he said something that has forever changed the course of my life, probably the most pivotal thing anyone has ever shared with me before. And during his session, he said, if you can't breathe somewhere, you don't belong there.
Hmm.
And so here I was in an environment in which my breath was being taken away from me. And when Dr. Perry shared this, he was sharing it in the in respect to movement. If your body is in a, twisted up position and you're having a challenging time breathing in that position, it probably implies that there's something about that position that your body doesn't love. And so you need to do some work to earn that space. But when he said it, I literally was like, I can't breathe. Something in my environment is telling me that I don't belong here. So me being me, I took that to heart, and I also took it to an extreme place. And I sold everything I owned, and I bought a one-way ticket as far away from Chicago as I could, which was Australia. And I started backpacking. I backpacked around the world for about 2 years. And I really consider that the start of me learning to be guided by my breath. And I haven't looked back since, and that was about 10 years ago.
Wow. So let's talk about breath because we all breathe. It's a tool that we have regardless of whether we're conscious of it or not. I think that there's a lot of unconsciousness around breath, and yet every single wisdom tradition um, acknowledges breath as a way to get into our connection to spirit. And so when you're talking about breath, you're talking about a specific way that it's helpful to breathe. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting question. I sometimes struggle with telling people that I teach people how to breathe. Um, I don't actually teach people how to breathe. And where I've started shifting my language is I teach people to reconnect with their breath. We come out of the womb knowing exactly how to breathe. And I think, like many things in our current worlds, um, we've been taught to demonize or to, maybe that's not the best description, but to ignore or view certain elements or ways of breathing as good or bad, when in reality, our breath is always just responding to our environment. That's it. So if I'm breathing in a way that is perceived as incorrect or bad, oftentimes that breath pattern is actually just a proper response to an environment that is not necessarily the best for us in the moment or the most supportive for us. It's a sign that something in the environment needs to shift, not a sign that I or my body is doing something wrong or that my breath is failing me. So that's some language that I'm really trying to get breath workers and breath facilitators to shift, is viewing the breath as breathing incorrectly or breathing correctly. Um, there is really truly no wrong or right way to breathe. There are better ways to breathe to facilitate the sensations and emotions and environment that we want. But our breath is always giving us little signals of whether or not our environment is safe or right for us in the moment. So when we can shift from, am I breathing right or wrong, or is this breathwork pattern right or wrong, to what information and what gifts are my breath giving me right now, we can learn to actually walk this collaborative path with it. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Um, One of the things about breath work that I noticed when I started doing breath work about 20 years ago was that it was able to take me to um, places that are very similar to even what you would call now a psychedelic experience. Like I was able to, like, sometimes it was a little bit scary, like I was able to like jump out of my body, or I was able to have visions, or I was just able to just be present with some of the intense emotions that were happening in my life that I perhaps was either in denial or had, you know, pushed down so that I wouldn't deal with it. Um, so can you, like, why is breath able to do that? Like, why is breath psychedelic? Why is breath able to take us to these places where, um, gets us out of our comfort zone and gets us to see with clarity what we must see?
So there's so many different directions that we could take this question. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is I really enjoy fusing scientific understanding with, uh, um, let's say, more widely not currently accepted ancestral wisdom. And a lot of that part of the breath is actually a lot of information that I've learned from you, or have gathered from you, and a lot of the beautiful traditions that you've shared with us. But if we're looking at the purely scientific space, which I do think is a really cool space to start, um, when we're doing, let's say, conscious connected breathing, or the type of breath work that can take us more towards that altered state of consciousness, what we're actually doing often is minimizing the oxygen that's going to our brain. And I hesitate sometimes to share that with people because that can feel a little scary, like my brain's not getting enough oxygen. But what that does is it causes your brain to prioritize the more primal parts of your brain and to turn off the more modern parts of our brain. So it quiets your executive functioning, it quiets the amygdala, and it allows you to more deeply connect with the emotional space, our more primal spaces in our brain. Scientifically, that's one of the main reasons why, when we're doing those styles of breath work, we are able to connect with and access emotional states that normally in our day to day life we're overriding. Which is really cool. It's really cool that through something as simple as our breath, we can engage with our brain in ways that we normally find challenging in our day to day modern lives. With that being said, there's so much connection between breath and spirit, which you alluded to in your very first question. So many different cultures, the word for breath and spirit are one and the same. So when we are choosing to intentionally connect with our breath, that provides this immediate connection to spirit as well. And because the breath is also such a beautiful portal to the present moment, if you're focused on your breath, there's absolutely no possible way for you to be dwelling on the past or looking forward towards the future. It's why the breath is also used so often as a foundation in a lot of traditional mindfulness practices. And so I think it's all of these things combined. It's that it's one of the most powerful tools to bring us into the present moment. It is a direct connection to spirit, but also it allows us to quiet down those more modern parts of our brain that are constantly saying, did you forget to take the dishes out of the dishwasher? Did you send that email that you needed to send? Did you pay that bill on time? It literally allows us to go deep into emotional feeling, which is really powerful.
Mm. That's such a great explanation. That really helps. I think I think of my partner Kyle, who like needs the signs. Like I don't need the science all the time. Like sometimes if I learn about something and it just intuitively feels like a total yes, I'm like, yeah, give me the science later. I love this. Like I'm just a yes. But there's people that really need the science to start, dipping their toes into a practice. So this is really helpful. And tell me, how do you see breath work helping us, when life just gets really challenging? And I was just on another podcast interview and I loved how she said, like, it's the micro and the macro, right? Like the micro is like challenging in terms of our own personal lives, right? Like maybe there's a death in the family or a loss of a job or you're sick in some way. And then there's the macro of like what's happening politically, what's happening to nature, what's, natural disasters, what's happening to animals that like really affects us. Um, so how has, and this is more personal question to you, like how has breath work supported you as you see this world changing so fast, so rapidly?
Yeah. I think um, there's a couple of different things coming to mind for me. And personally, and on more of a micro, using the terminology you just shared, in a more micro space, the most beautiful thing about our breath is that it literally wants nothing more than for us to be alive. And not just alive as in taking my next breath, but like alive, like so filled with life. And so if you can develop deep trust and surrender into that, then your breath becomes the most beautiful compass that you'll ever have in your entire life. Um, and what I mean by that is when I personally have been faced with really challenging decisions, sometimes they can be super challenging to navigate in our current world simply because there's so much information and so much noise, and you have so many different opinions, and you can Google everything and you put everything into ChatGPT, and um, there's so much external noise that we oftentimes turn to when we're faced with making challenging decisions. But if you can turn inward and connect with your breath will always give you the answer that's going to keep you the most alive. Point blank. It's like the most beautiful compass that you'll ever carry with you in your entire life. It doesn't always mean that the actions necessary to listen to your breath will be easy, but your breath will never lie to you, ever. And I really think moving to a macro space, and this is something that I sat with significantly when I was thinking about creating my breathwork facilitator training. I kept in my head, for many reasons, finding resistance because there are so many breathwork trainings right now. There are so many different facilitator trainings. And so when I was sitting with it, it was like, what am I adding? What am I adding to the space? What am I adding to the noise? Am I really contributing to something greater? And the answer I kept coming back to was absolutely 100% yes, because if everyone can learn to develop that relationship with their breath as a compass, I truly think the world would be a better place. We have been so disconnected from this gift that we're born with, and that is with us literally every breath of our life. We're so disconnected from it, and reconnecting to it is one of the most empowering things that we can gift both individuals but also communities. And so on a macro level, I really do think that more people having that wisdom can never be a bad thing.
Hmm. I love that. I love that you said, because I think about this often when I fly, you know, like your breath cannot lie. And sometimes we've been in so much denial, or trauma has built self defense mechanisms that make us believe in a certain way, but it might not be the truth, right? So for example, um, I've noticed that there are times when I'm uncomfortable, but I push through and I'm like, I'm fine, everything's okay. And it's actually like paying attention to my breath that allows me to recognize, oh, like I'm actually really uncomfortable, even though I'm pretending that everything's okay. And so my breath actually brings me back to that space of compassion, to come back and say, oh, okay, I'm uncomfortable. So let's look at like what part is uncomfortable. And actually, breath, like you said, is the compass that can help us come back to awareness of ourselves, right? Know thyself is really like everything. If we know ourselves, then the world just shows up in such a beautiful way versus when we don't know ourselves. Um, One of the things about Brittany, that some of you might not know, that I love about you, Brittany, is that you've been a nomad for a long time. So it's been how many years since you've been living out of first your van and now this new rig?
Yeah. So my nomadic journey actually started living out of a backpack. And I left the US and started traveling, it'll be 10 years this November.
Happy 10-year almost anniversary.
You. Yeah.
Wow. So one of the things that I want to say about Brittany, because she's a friend and I've not only worked with her, we've also played together. My return to Burning Man was actually with Brittany after I think 17 years of not going to Burning Man. So we work and play together well, Brittany and I. And one of the things that I find myself, I'm living in this beautiful little casita in Santa Monica, but I'm always thinking like, God, I wish I had more space. I'm noticing myself saying like, I wish we had more space. I need another room. Like, and just going on Zillow looking for a 2-bedroom and, not finding the exact 2-bedroom of my dreams. And yet like we live in a really beautiful, beautiful 1-bedroom. And so I think of you often because it takes a level of grounding and conscious skill to, one, live out of a backpack and then live out of a van, because I think that naturally, some of us, I know it's not everyone, but some of us really enjoy having a lot of stuff and having a lot of space. I'm one of those. And yet I find myself when, I'm not living in a van, but I'm living in the smallest place I've probably ever lived in my life. And it's not small. But I find myself having to be like, I have to develop a whole new way of approaching my life. Like every time I buy something new, the rule that I've given myself is like, okay, if you're going to buy something new, you have to also give away the same amount of things that I'm buying new, right? So that way I can thrive in a small space. So I'm just saying that because I noticed that you've really thrived in a small space. And I'm not saying that like, I mean, you have the world, when you live in a van. So it's a different kind of living. But there's so many people who have that dream of like, one day I want to live in a van and travel the world or travel through America. And they just don't do it because there's so many fears. But I've just seen you do it in such a beautiful way. So I'd love for you to like just share like how's that been, especially as we're coming to your 10-year anniversary. Before we continue with the rest of this episode, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsors of this podcast. This podcast is made possible by one of our sponsors, Microdosify. Their mission is to combat the global mental health crisis one person at a time through quality psychedelic education and community. They've just launched a new program called Microdosify Spaces, a community-led support group dedicated to helping you integrate your psychedelic experiences. And best of all, they are free. To learn more or sign up, visit the show notes. If you listen until the end of this episode, you will also receive a code to take 10% off anything in their shop. Stay tuned.
Yeah. So many stories are popping up for me, and I'm trying to decide which ones are most worthwhile to pull out of the closet. It's really interesting because when I first became nomadic, I distilled everything down to a singular backpack because I wanted to travel the world as much as I could. And everything that didn't fit in that backpack either got sold, or I had a friend who had, her and her husband had just bought like a 5-bedroom massive house in Chicago. And they were like, we have a spare closet. And, if you want to store anything in that closet, by all means, store some boxes there. So I gave myself 4 boxes of, whatever I wanted to keep. And then my backpack that I was going to travel with and everything else, I sold or donated. And I remember like a week before leaving Chicago, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by the last bits of things that I had, and not everything would fit into those 4 boxes. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed and frustrated with myself and questioning whether or not I was making the right decision. Like literally just like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at all of these beautiful things that I've amassed, but I've given myself 4 boxes and I can't fit it all in there. And I would take one thing out and put something else in. And then I'd look at what was left and be like, no, I can't get rid of some of that. So then I'd pick something else, take it out of the box and put something else in. Fast forward, these boxes go in my friend's closet, and I traveled for, about 2 years before I came back to the US for the first time. And I was so excited to go to the closet because I was like, oh, I know I have some extra clothes in there. I've been living with literally, I think I had 1 pair of jeans, a long sleeve t-shirt, 2 tank tops, yoga pants, like 15 clothing items. And so I was excited to switch some stuff out. But for the life of me, I couldn't actually remember what was in the boxes. And I remember when I finally got there and was able to go through these boxes 2 years later, I was like pulling stuff out and literally was like, I saved this of all, like, why would I save this? Like my things had such a different, I had changed so much that those things that had once been such an important part of me, I didn't even remember. And I had zero connection to. And it was a really interesting experience for me because it's really shifted how I feel about things. This would have been about 8 years ago now. And here I am 8 years later. And that moment still significantly guides how I choose to consume things. And oftentimes, if I'm really struggling, I lived overseas for 7 of those years. I've been back in the US for a few years now. And I will say, being back in the US, I have struggled with not letting myself go deeper into that overconsumption space, if you will. And anytime I'm feeling that urge to buy for the sake of buying, all I have to do is put myself back in my tiny Chicago apartment with those 4 boxes and be like, okay, 2 years later, would I be proud if this ended up in a box or not? And most of the time, the answer is literally no. And just to tie this in, my breath also tells me. I can literally sit with something in a store and take a couple of deep breaths, transport myself into that room, and my breath's going to tell me, like, is this a worthwhile thing for me to spend my money on? Is this going to give me the joy that I think it's going to give me beyond that initial dopamine hit of handing over some cash for it? And so, I think tiny living ultimately, it's just made me a lot more mindful of how I consume. And, that goes beyond material things as well. Yeah. And I think just the last little thing I want to throw in there, because, you were saying such a small space, such a small space. What I think a lot of people don't realize about the type of lifestyle that I lead, or a lot of us who live in vans or even backpack, I have way more space than the average person. Like, I am currently sitting in my truck, and if I extend my arms hit side to side. However, I have spent a grand total of 1 hour inside my truck in the last week. My dog and I have been outside, rolling in the grass, on the ground, on hikes, breathing fresh air. I have way more space because my world is so much more integrated into nature than most people with a 6-bedroom house.
Yeah. That's powerful. That's so powerful. So how do you approach the world? Like, how does your lifestyle allow you to be ready for, the massive changes that are happening?
Um, what's really beautiful about this lifestyle is you have to be, it's forced resilience, but it's also forced resourcefulness.
Mm.
Um, stuff, especially living in a rig, so moving beyond backpacking, um, vehicles are not meant to be lived in. um, and stuff breaks all of the time. And right now I'm also in Mexico. So, um, what I'm used to be able to get. There aren't Amazon lockers down here. I can't just immediately go onto the internet, order something, and have it shipped to a Whole Foods in 2 days like I can in the US. And so if something breaks and I don't have something to replace it that fits immediately, you have to get really creative. And it also reminds me too, I lived in India for about a year. And that's one of the things that I loved so much about living in India. I had some Nepalese friends who were building a restaurant there, and there was no such thing as a problem, only solutions. Like, they decided to create this restaurant, but they didn't have a lot of money. And one of the first things that they needed was a fridge, but they had no money for a fridge. And it's just like, no worries, no worries, a fridge will show up. And sure enough, someone's willing to give them a fridge, but they have to get it to the restaurant. And somehow they managed to figure out how to strap a fridge onto a scooter to get it, 30 miles to the restaurant outdoors that they want to open. And in their world, there's literally no problems, only solutions. And that's really how it is in the van community as well. You get really creative with how to solve the constant challenges that this lifestyle really throws at you. With that being said, it also forces you to rely on community in a way that I think community is meant to be relied on. That we so often forget when we're so used to having everything at our fingertips. Um, you know, it's not a community that's not without its faults and struggles by any means. Um, but even just today, in a group chat that I'm in with a bunch of van lifers, someone's cabinet latch broke. And so they couldn't keep their cabinet shut. And if you can't keep your cabinet shut when you're driving, they are useless. And so they were asking in the chat, does anyone have, an extra cabinet latch? And no one did, but then everyone had a lot of solutions that they could offer. And so it forces you to get comfortable asking for help. It forces you to get comfortable receiving help, but it also forces you to get comfortable sharing what you have for the benefit of someone else because it makes our community stronger. So yeah, I definitely say like resilience, resourcefulness, but also this deep nudge to really lean into community in a way that I think we've been disconnected from communities in a lot of our modern lifestyles.
So yeah, many people would think that because you're a nomad or you live in a van or a truck, RV, bus, that it would be maybe a lonelier life because you're not in one place to build these friendships. And a lot of people think that community is best built when you can spend a lot of time in one place. So I love that you brought this up about community as a nomad, because there's other ways that people build communities that don't require you to be always in the same place. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because I first started experiencing this when I was backpacking. When you're backpacking, especially and you're like in a hostel for a night, you want to get to know people because, especially if you're traveling solo, which I was for those years, but a lot of people in hostels are leaving the next day or the day after, and your schedules don't necessarily always align. And when you're craving that connection, it forces you to go beyond surface level really quickly. So I remember I went like my entire first year of backpacking before someone asked me what I did for work. And I remember the first time someone asked me that, and I had not been asked that question in like a year. I remember being taken aback and just being like, oh, that is a point of conversation for so many people and something that we put so much value on in a lot of cultures. But when you're in these very transient spaces and you're craving deep connection, it doesn't matter what you do for work. You want to bypass all of that small talk and you want to, you crave to get to know people beyond the surface level that we put on things a lot when we're comfortable in our communities. And it's the same thing in the van world. A lot of my closest friends, and it's silly to say this out loud, but a lot of my closest friends in this community, if I look at collectively how much time I've spent with them, a week, 2 weeks, a month, maybe, that's it. That's the only amount of time I've spent with them in person. But when you're with each other and you've had that distance and you miss each other, you go beyond the surface level so much faster. Not only that, because it is such a lifestyle that requires resilience and resourcefulness, I have connected with a lot of those people in problem solving. I've connected with a lot of those people in someone needs help and support. Someone's van is stuck, deep in the stand 2 hours away and they're in trouble. And so, how as a community do we come up with a solution to support them? So, the relationships, even though the in-person time is much less than what I would get if if they were my neighbor or we saw each other in yoga class once a week at the exact same studio, you know, week after week after week for years. I feel like I have deeper relationships with them because our environment dictates it in a way.
Mm. How do you think we can apply that in environments that are not like van or nomadic? Like, how could we apply that concept to when we live in cities? A lot of people my age or younger that are like reaching 40s, I hear this complaint a lot, which is like, oh, as you get older, it's really hard to make friends. And I refuse to subscribe to that. That doesn't apply to me, but because I hear it so much from people when they reach a certain age, right? Um, and I'm not saying that there's not a level of truth to that, right? Like people have children and then they have to tend to the children and all the different things that children bring that you must give attention to, right? Like, oh, I have to take my kid to soccer practice. Or people have now started taking care of their elderly parents, right? So there's definitely truth to that. Our time is is more compacted because as we grow older, perhaps there's more responsibilities. So how do you think we can apply these community building, friendship building concepts from van life to creating community and making new friends when we're not nomadic?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things here. And I also don't think it's necessary to have to always be making new friends, first of all. Like my lifestyle definitely makes that easier for me because it is so transient. But also what I'm finding, so this is my going on my 4th year in the van. I'm finding less and less urge to make new friends and more urge to really nurture the relationships that I have. And so I think that's where, I would really say the word to think about is nurture, right? Um, to problem solve with your community, to not let people take care of it in a convenience way simply because that's what we're so conditioned to. So, if my plumbing breaks in my truck, I don't immediately go and call a plumber. I pop into one of my groups, with friends that are in the same community, and I say, hey, has anyone had this issue before? And then before I know it, people are sharing their experiences. They're sharing their silly, stressful, challenging stories where their pipes broke and blah, blah, blah. And here's how they fixed it. And maybe that would be helpful for me. So instead of just relying on, okay, my pipes broke, I can call a plumber, getting curious about, are there other solutions outside of my convenience oriented mindset that I typically tend to go to? Are there ways that I can problem solve with my community? So taking that initiative to ask for support in those ways instead of keeping your community out of it, I think goes a really long way. People want to help people. People feel important when they're asked for help, even if they can't offer the help that you specifically need in that moment. You're still opening these doorways that say, I'm willing to be vulnerable with you in this way. Also, just, taking the initiative to, I think, provide help when help's needed, even if it's not asked for. And obviously, there's some art to that. You don't just want to be knocking down everyone's doors being like, hey, here's my help, take it, even if you absolutely don't want it. But just to use an example that I've seen in our own community, Michaela De La Mico, Mama De La Mico, is having a surgery, and I've seen on her Instagram that she's asking for a meal train. And so often we try to hide in those things ourselves or take the convenience route, right? I have a freezer. I know I'm having surgery, so I'm just going to go to Costco and load up on frozen meals. But allowing your community to be involved in your problem solving and in your moments of nurturing, it takes mindfulness to do that and to get out of our, I can do it alone and convenience mindset. I think those are the two things that often get in the way of community. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, or gives
it gives
on.
me a lot to think about. And I love how wise you are about community. I think these are like such valuable skills to have right now. And so I know you're going to launch a facilitators training, the second one, which I'm actually going to be a part of. And I want to just give you this opportunity to tell us about, like, why would somebody want to do breath work? Like, how does it change us when we have this tool um, for ourselves and maybe, to give others?
Yeah. Well, I want to rewind just slightly because I do think there's
Hold on, let me rewind.
Toot toot, DJ Pop. Pachamama in the house. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what breathwork is, and a lot of that is facilitated by a lot of our own people in this space. But when we think of breathwork, most people immediately go to the Instagram worthy, super deep sessions that take you into an altered space and are meant to, and I'm putting this in quotes for people who aren't watching the video, release trauma and to have this big emotional release. If that is the only focus that we're putting on when we are connecting with our breath, there is so much lost. There's so much beauty that we don't get to explore. And so I just want to start with the simple definition of like, what is breath work in and of itself? And in my opinion, it is any intentional connection with our own breath. So if I ask you all to take an inhale through your nose with me, and a soft, delicious exhale through the mouth, we just practiced breath work together. We took space to intentionally connect with our breath. There is so much power in learning how to, in moments of confusion, and this is something I've really learned from you, this terminology of confusion versus clarity and how to tell when we're in confusion versus clarity. But when we are really dealing with a lot of confusion, if you can find your breath will never lie to you. It wants nothing more than to keep you alive. And it is the quickest way to bring you into clarity, and in my opinion. And there's so much empowerment in that, because no matter who you are, if you are alive, it does not matter your physical ailments that you might deal with. It doesn't matter your age. If you're a wee baby or an elderly person whose movement at this stage in their life has been massively restricted, it does not matter. All of us have the capability of connecting with our breath right here in this very moment. And so many of us have been disconnected from that. Yeah. So there's so much empowerment to be had by teaching people how to connect with their breath beyond the Instagram worthy breathwork techniques that we see often and people tend to assume is the only way to experience breath work. And just a tiny little story actually to help illustrate that. I'm on this beautiful organic eco ranch in the mountains here in Baja. And the caretaker of the property, my very first day that I arrived, I had offered to hold a conscious connected breathwork session for anyone who was staying here. So that is a type of breathwork that takes you more to that altered state. Before I was able to hold the breathwork session, though, unfortunately, the caretaker was bitten by a dog and she had to go to the hospital. Mm. And when she came back, she said to me, "Thank you so much for everything you did." And I was like, what did I do? Like, I wasn't, I heard the tussle, but like I wasn't around when she was bit. I didn't give her any medical care. She was off at the hospital before I found out what happened. I was like, what did I do? And she was like, well, I was really freaking out. And then as we started driving to the hospital, I remembered like I was so bummed that I couldn't make your breathwork session. And she was like, but then as soon as I thought about a breathwork session, I remembered that I could just calm my breath down. And she was like, and so I just started calming my breath down, and that removed so much anxiety out of the whole situation. So as she's in the car, she says, she was super bummed that she remembered that she couldn't make my breathwork session. But we had talked about the breath briefly. And what she said was, even though I couldn't make your breathwork session, it was the biggest gift that I had in that moment because it reminded me that I could connect with my breath, slow it down. And she was able to remove a lot of the anxiety and panic that had built up around that situation from her. And so when she came back, that's what she said. She was like, thank you for just, had you not been here, I would not have thought about my breath.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So as we're getting to a close, we're going to put all your links, of course, if anybody's interested in doing the facilitators training with Brittany. All the information will be in the links. But yeah, I always love to ask this question as we close, which is, what is one piece of wisdom you would like to share before we say goodbye? A piece of wisdom that has really helped you and supported you in these times, that somehow is going to be medicine for those that are listening.
Yeah. I think, just looping back to that very first story. So tying a bow on this entire journey that we've been on together. Dr. Perry, when he said, if you can't breathe somewhere, you don't belong there. The other thing that he also said at some point after that was, you can't get better in the same environment that you got sick in. And that has been also a huge guiding force for me in learning how to have courage, to take movement, and to use my breath to facilitate that movement. I think that's, ultimately why I decided to call my facilitators training Move Breath. If you really are feeling, let's say, dis-ease, so not in ease in your environment, it does require movement. And sometimes that can be really scary. And our breath is truly the most powerful thing we have for facilitating that movement and giving us the courage and the bravery to move somewhere different. If there's one last piece of wisdom that I'd share, it's just to trust that your breath truly wants nothing more than to support you in walking through this world as the most alive version of yourself. And in those moments where we know something in our environment needs to shift, working with our breath to really create the courage and bravery to make that movement that we know we need to take, to make not just our own internal world better for ourselves, but also the world around us, our communities, the earth, even. All of that power really truly is encapsulated in learning how to build divine, unwavering trust in your breath.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was powerful. And thank you for being here. Thank you to all our listeners. And of course, if you want to get a hold of Brittany, if you want to join her facilitator training, Move Breath, all the links will be here. Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the Pachamama School Podcast is to subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with a loved one. To stay connected with our community and learn about upcoming ceremonies, gatherings, and earth wisdom teachings, visit the show notes and sign up for our newsletter at xochitlashe.com. As a special gift to our podcast listeners, you can download my free ebook, Bridging Worlds, Indigenous Wisdom for Microdosing Mushrooms. while you'll learn to integrate indigenous wisdom into your microdosing practice. Once again, I'd love to thank our sponsor, Microdosify. Listeners can take 10% off anything in their shop. Just enter the code SACRED. Thank you so much for walking this path with me today. And may your life be filled with Pachamama's blessings, medicine, and magic.